The leaders of South Korea, Japan, and China will have their own separate meeting today. Now, what tangible outcome is expected to come out from the three-way talks? For more, we're joined by Professor Hans Schattle. Good morning.
Good morning, Dummy.
Thanks for joining us. In what way is it meaningful that the three sides have managed to put their heads together after more than 4 years?
Well, it's about time, I think. I've been eagerly awaiting the return to talks here. Of course, the COVID pandemic delayed summits initially, and there have also been unresolved tensions among these three countries as well. As mentioned in your earlier reports, the whole THAAD missile defense issue was, in some respects, restricting dialogue between South Korea and China. It's also good, I think, and we could see this with the bilateral talks yesterday, that some of the sticking points among the three countries were discussed one-to-one. China has put a ban on Japanese seafood in response to Japan's wastewater releases from the shuttered Fukushima nuclear plant. I know the two leaders were set to talk about that. And of course, China has become further apart from Japan and South Korea now that they've been working more closely through the U.S. trilateral relationship and also through the G7 as well. So, bottom line is these three countries cannot escape working with each other. It's important that they talk. And I think China especially is highly motivated to talk a lot for economic reasons at this point in time, too, because the economic relationships here are key. I think that will be something to watch as the three leaders talk all in one setting today.
And what Seoul's top office couldn't stress enough was that the trilateral meetup will secure, momentum for three-way cooperation and benefits that people in those three countries can actually, feel and enjoy. The question is, what could they be?
Right, that is the big question going in. One possible answer would be, can we see any movement toward a three-way trade deal? This is something that has been wished for quite some time now, maybe even more than a decade. And as the host of the summit, South Korea is driving this agenda, but we'll have to see if anything can move forward on that. I don't expect any breakthroughs in that regard, but I think Yi Chang, the premier of China, is very business-minded. It's significant, as your report pointed out, that there's also a business summit going on. So you might see economics take precedence in these talks, but there's a whole range of other issues that are being brought forward, from public health to how to deal with aging populations, an issue that all three countries are facing, disaster prevention measures. I noticed that climate change and sustainable development are on the agenda. What I didn't see specifically is whether the air pollution problems in this region are on the agenda. And that is something that honestly I wish would be discussed a little bit more fully with the three countries. So I would hope that they would take air pollution and bundle that into a larger set of issues, because more collective action is needed to try to ease that problem that affects daily life in all three of the countries. So that is one agenda that they certainly could push forward both today and maybe for further cooperation.
Definitely. And the presidential office said there won't be a clear-cut agreement on North Korea issues, but there are, Japanese reports saying there may be one between the three sides. Professor Schattle, what do you think? Will the three sides be able to reach a consensus on managing North Korea issues?
Well, North Korea's satellite launch that you've just announced and they've just announced this morning, the possibility of that impending, it's certainly, I think, time. The announcement was certainly time to try to take some attention not only in the news coverage away from the summit, but also, I think, to try to get the leaders talking more about North Korea as well. It certainly puts this on the agenda, I think, for the summit. So whether any kind of breakthrough in North Korea could emerge without the U.S. and even perhaps Russia, without all the regional stakeholders at the table, that's a question in itself. But I think one thing that China, Japan, and South Korea can do is put forward a statement of agreement in principle that there should be no conflict on the Korean Peninsula, period, and also try to work in various ways with North Korea, restarting dialogue. In some respects, Japan is especially out in the cold with their relationship with North Korea. I know they've had some overtures to North Korea, and North Korea too, in the last year and a half, but more could be done in that regard. So Japan might want to be brought a little bit more fully into that larger context.
Professor Schattle, before I let you go briefly, will South Korea-Japan summit or South Korea-Japan-China summit be able to, alleviate U.S.-China tensions in any way?
Well, I don't think they can do that single-handedly without the U.S. there. And of course, South Korea can't necessarily solve a problem between two other countries. But what is interesting here is in its news coverage leading up to the summit, Xinhua News Agency, China's state-run news source, kept emphasizing that they are under pressure right now. China are under pressure with the U.S. Efforts to redirect the production of semiconductors back domestically. And I know that China is interested, I think, in forging more relationships in the tech sector, both with South Korea and Japan. So whether we see this meeting actually alleviating tensions between the U.S. and China is one thing, but I think China is looking to try to bring Korea and Japan closer in terms of forging greater economic ties to kind of give China another edge with respect to maybe a smaller down the road, slightly, relatively speaking, a smaller economic relationship with the U.S. But keep in mind that China and the U.S. still do a lot of business despite some of the economic and geopolitical tensions. And the whole relationship between China and the U.S. is very different, say, from the relationship between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during another period of geopolitical competition. The U.S. and China are much more interdependent, interconnected to begin with. So Japan and South Korea certainly fit in that larger web.
Indeed. All right, Professor Schattle, thank you so much for your insight this morning. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me, Dami. Take care.